Hello friends, my name is Michael Levine and welcome to another episode of Without Notes, a show that I happen to think is well described by its title. It's a conversation with a fascinating guest without any preconditions or any notes. My partner for the expedition is one of the most acclaimed and esteemed rabbis in the world, Rabbi David Wolpe. He's the author of 8 books, but he is a thought leader, not only in the Jewish community, but in many areas of American intellectual life, and I'm very honored to have him here. Welcome, Rabbi.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
So where were you born?
I was born in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania.
Right.
I lived there till I was 10. My father was a rabbi, and then we moved to Philadelphia, and when people ask me where I grew up, I say Philadelphia. Lived there, went to college there.
Were you a modestly good student?
I was a good student. I have 3 brothers, 2 older, 1 younger. I think we were all reasonably good students.
Right. Now, in the case of your being a good student, is it your memory that you were a good student naturally, or did you have to work at it, or a little of both? Or?
I have very lopsided gifts.
Okay.
I really do, in the sense that math was always a little bit of a struggle for me. Languages, always a little bit of a struggle for me. English, history, philosophy, I did effortlessly and with love both. So I was a voracious reader from the time I was a little kid. And those sorts of things came very easily to me.
All right, so now you go to high school in Philadelphia?
In Philadelphia, to Akiba Hebrew Academy.
Okay. Now, by the way, in high school, by the time you're in high school, you're speaking Hebrew fluently?
Well, languages were one of the areas that I always struggled in. So I spoke Hebrew. I spoke Hebrew semi-adequately. Let's put it
Define
that way.
fluently.
Exactly. Semi-adequately.
Okay, great. So you're, and then after high school, what happens to you?
I went to the University of Pennsylvania because I had the great good fortune of my mother having bad teeth. And it was actually a great good fortune.
That's
an original statement.
That's
an
original statement. I have never had a guest say that to me before.
Well, I will tell you why I say that.
All right.
So my oldest brother went to Amherst. And then I'm the third of 4. Then my mother, who, as I say, had bad teeth, went to University of Pennsylvania Dental School to get her teeth fixed for a long time. And one day they said to her, the person who runs the continuing education program just quit. Do you have any interest in doing that? And she, sitting in the dentist chair, said, sure, that sounds interesting. And at that time, being that level of employee, whatever it was, meant that both my second brother and I could, if we got into Penn, we could go for free.
Oh, wow.
So my second brother went to Penn, I went to Penn. My older brother left Amherst, got his PhD at Penn. And it was, for us, an unbelievable opportunity. Now, if I owe that to bad teeth.
You do. You really do. Now, had I met you in high school, would you have appeared to me to have come from a middle-class home, a lower middle-class home, or an upper middle-class home? Or
I would have been a middle-class home, slightly heavy, very wisecracky and not always as well behaved as one would expect. And also a pretty avid chess player, which was my principal hobby, and in fact, to this day, remains an interest of mine.
Wow. So when did you begin playing chess?
High school. Because there was a kid in my high school who kept beating me, and it bothered me. And I didn't like it, so I started to study so that I could beat him, and then I became involved in the game in general. Around 14, I started to play, and it became a major interest. To this day, I follow professional chess reasonably closely, which is easy to do with the internet.
Very interesting, yes. Yeah. And of course, many young people today don't take some of the routes that we're discussing, chess in particular, because of the internet.
Right, exactly so.
Or maybe they play chess on the internet.
They do. I mean, chess on the internet is a huge phenomenon.
Right.
But also there are a lot of other games that are really fascinating and are graphically probably more engaging than chess.
Yeah.
So,
And more addictive.
and more addictive.
Now, so you go to Penn, and what is your major?
So I started off thinking I would major in philosophy, but that required taking German, which I did for a semester and then decided this was a very bad idea.
That was not a crowd pleaser, if I might mention.
It's not that. Yeah, that's actually not why it was a bad. It was a bad idea because, as I said, I'm not great at languages to start with.
Yes.
And
that
and
one
I
in particular.
I decided that Mark Twain might be right when he said the German language is just a lousy excuse for spitting at people. But I was not a very successful German student, and then I switched to English literature, which was my great love always, and spent my junior year actually at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland studying English literature, and that's what I graduated with. I graduated with my degree in English and a minor in philosophy.
Okay, so now you're 22, you've graduated college, 22, 23, you've graduated college. What becomes your next step?
I took a year off because I wanted to write, and I wrote some stuff and thought I wanted to be a writer. But at the same time,
And when you took your year off,
Yeah.
Rabbi, did you live at home?
No. I lived in an apartment at Penn, and I made a living by both. I taught Hebrew school, and I also worked at Urban Outfitters in Philadelphia. And there, because I was not good at folding, I ended up selling women's shoes, because there were only two departments where you didn't have to fold. One was men's shoes, and they already had someone. So they said, okay, you're in women's shoes. And I sold many espadrilles in my day. And then, but during the summers, I would work at Camp Ramah. And I was out at Camp Ramah in California, here in Ojai, because from Philadelphia it was interesting to go out to camp in California. I just thought it would be for the summer, when a rabbi named Elliot Dorff said to me, what are you doing with your life? And I said, I want to be a writer. And he said, what do you want to write about? And I said, I don't really know anything. I've just always wanted to write. And he said, well, why don't you go to rabbinical school? He said, go for a year. The worst that happens is you learn something, and the best that happens is you find your subject. And I literally wasn't doing anything. And I said, okay. And it was in that instant that I decided I would go to rabbinical school, and I went and loved it. And so I stayed.
And so brought on by a simple twist of fate.
Exactly so. It was, honestly, I think if I had not had that conversation, I have no idea what I would have done.
Had you been absent from that meeting that
Exactly,
day?
that's right.
It's just hard to know.
It is hard to know.
Okay, so you go to rabbinic school, and then what becomes of you?
Well, I went to rabbinical school, and the reason I stayed was because, unlike my professors at Penn, the teachers in rabbinical school tried to live what they were teaching. And that seemed to me a much more interesting undertaking than teaching Middlemarch, for example, which is a novel I love, but after you're done teaching it, you don't go out and live Middlemarch.
Right.
And so I finished rabbinical school, and one thing I knew was that I did not want to take a congregation. And we can talk about why that is in a second, but I knew that. So I got a fellowship at, I did 2 years in LA, 1 year in Israel, 2 years in New York. And then I got a fellowship back in LA at the university, what was then called the University of Judaism.
And that was what year?
That was 1987.
1987.
So during a 2-year fellowship, I wrote my first book, which was called The Healer of Shattered Hearts, A Jewish View of God. And then I started a career of writing and lecturing. And I taught at the university, and I worked in the library at the university for about 8 years. In that time, I'd gotten married, and
What year did you marry?
1992. And then we moved back east, so I would teach at the seminary and be close to family. But I was still doing a lot of traveling. And when our daughter was about to be born, we decided it would be much better if I was at a congregation, because at least I'd be in the same home every
Zip
night.
code, yeah.
And at that time, Sinai, the rabbi of Sinai left, and they called me, and I had already been doing high holiday services here for singles for
Now, this is
a long
big
time.
platform.
It is a big platform.
Big platform. So this,
And so I came back here in '97, and I've been here ever since.
yeah. And you have been a very, very big presence, not only in Jewish life, but in Los Angeles life for a very long time. I can't remember when you weren't a...
So one of the things that is really, that is seemingly, to me it was paradoxical, but it actually is true, is a good friend of mine at the congregation said to me when I was thinking of coming here, he said, you think that you'll have a bigger platform by traveling around and speaking. He said, but actually, as you just said, if you're in the congregation, your platform will be bigger than if you're a sort of independent operator.
This particular platform especially.
And it proved to be the case. And I think that that's in part because the Jewish community in the major cities in America has tremendous reach. And if you nudge them a little bit, you can make a genuine difference.
Right. Well, that was fascinating, not unexpectedly in my mind, but if you enjoyed it, and I hope you did, and found it meaningful, and I hope you did, please like us on Facebook and share it on your social media channels, but more importantly, come back for our next episode, which will continue our conversation.